Everybody wants to learn how to do sales. Everyone wants to be a good salesperson. And solopreneurs especially want to know, what are the secrets around selling? Selling is a challenge. And what's funny is a lot of solopreneurs get caught up in marketing, which is really about creating the audience so you can sell. Very distinct from sales. In this episode, I'm talking about selling. And I share with you one question that I picked up from a podcast around life coaching, believe it or not, and how that's really helped me become a better salesperson from the standpoint of having a conversation with a prospect. And what's really interesting about this particular episode is my growth in confidence, in self-worth, because very often in sales conversations, you will get a money objection. There will be some conversation around why that's an issue. And if that comes up on a chronic basis, to me, based on my experience, that usually is because you have a challenge with how you value your worth. Being a solopreneur is a very personal, high-touch type of vocation, especially when you're delivering the value versus being a middle person. When you're delivering that value, when you're providing the service, when you're making the product or whatever it is, that's you. It's got your DNA in it. It's got your personality. It's everything about you. So of course, it's going to feel personal. Of course, it's going to put you in a more intimate, vulnerable attitude when it comes to working with your clients. Over the years, I've learned how to become more confident, more strong in my own self-worth, seeing what I provide is incredibly valuable. And that has really changed the compass for me when it comes to selling. And so in this episode, I talk a lot about that particular question as well as just selling in general. It's a little more prescriptive than I have been, but I do share my journey, learning to sell and all that. I've even written a book about it called Guide to Selling. And I wrote it about 10 years ago, and it's like a memoir. I talk about being in grade school and going door to door selling posters and what that was like. And it was a very fun book to write, believe me, because I was surprised at how many experiences I had selling as a young person, because I didn't have good self-esteem, because when I first started my business, it was more like I had to survive. So I was basically giving away my work and over-delivering. And it took me a long while to build up that confidence, that self-worth, that ability to really highly value what I offer. And boy, did it change my sales conversations and how I address the people when they have objections. And because I'm more confident, I attract less people who give me those types of objections. When I get a referral and they don't end up working with me, it's typically not because it's a money objection, it's because it's not a fit. And you'll love this episode because the question that I give you that I picked up from this podcast is a perfect pivot point to know if that prospect is really ready to change. So anyway, it's going to be a good one. You're going to enjoy it. And I give you a good prompt at the end. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome to My Solopreneur Life. I'm Terry Pappy, your gracious host, and I am so glad you're here. I have a wonderful episode for you. Sit back, relax, and let's have some real talk about what it is to be a solopreneur. As you may know, or not, if this is your first episode, then you got to go back and listen to some of the episodes. This whole first season is about telling my story of how I became a solopreneur, what I've done in my business. There is some how-tos in there as well, but it's mainly about what I've struggled with, what I've learned about myself, what I've learned about being in business, and some personal stories that should help give you a good understanding of where I'm coming from and why I'm doing the show, as well as sharing my insights. And believe me, I am not the Yoda of solopreneurship, but I have had a lot of great experiences that I definitely want to impart. One of them is around selling. Now, in future seasons, I am going to be doing more prescriptive on selling, marketing, branding, you name it, the whole gamut of the areas that I'm strong in, which is around relationship building, communications, and customer experience, which are, to me, the pinnacle of any kind of business relationship. If you're not taking care of your customers, then why are you in business? So today I want to talk about a concept that I learned, and I can't take full ownership for this, but I'll take full ownership of sharing it with you. I was listening to a podcast years and years ago, and it was a good podcast at the time. This is well over 10 years ago. And it was, do you remember when life coaching was like all the rage? Everybody was becoming a life coach. Everybody took certification, like, I'm a life coach, I'm a life coach. Even I took a coaching certification because I wanted, like, what is this coaching all about? And now it's commonplace where you run into somebody and they're like, oh, I'm a business coach, or I'm a this coach, I'm a that coach. And I think it's pretty cool. It's a great industry and lots of opportunity there. But what I picked up on this coaching call, and I apologize for not remembering the name of the host and what she was selling. Obviously, she was selling a coaching marketing program. But this one it was like a formula for getting people to lean in and have a sales conversation. And I love the simplicity of it. And I'll share it with you in a minute. But I wanted to touch on, again, the distinction between marketing and sales. Do they work together? Absolutely. To me, and I don't know if this is the industry term or way you want to look at it, but for me, marketing is about creating audience, getting attention, getting people to look at what you have so they can take the next step. So for me, marketing precedes sales. Sales can also dovetail back into marketing from the standpoint of learning what your audience likes, what sells well, what doesn't sell well, and so on. Now, I don't want to get exhaustive in this, but for me, they're two very distinct things. I don't look at myself as a great marketer, mainly because my personality, as I've talked in prior episodes, is very much about wanting to serve, wanting to nurture, being creative, having deep relationships with my clients, really stepping into their business and having a big heart for my business and for my clients. And what that does is that makes me resist, and I do resist and shrink away from self-promotion, a lot of chest beating, look at me, I'm the best, woohoo! And all of that stuff that is about putting yourself out there. Now, I do know, and I've said this before, that it has had an impact on keeping my awareness low. Like, I don't have hundreds of thousands of followers or likes or any of that stuff on social media because I'm rather quiet on social media. I think LinkedIn is probably the one I'm more recently posting on, and it's more of a give back, like, here's something that'll brighten your day. Here's something I just learned about my business. Here's something cool here. It's not your typical marketing where it's like, click here to download my free white paper on this, that, and the other. Been there, done that. It's just not my style. That is also why most of my business is referral based. That aside, sales is critical for your business, period, end of story. A lot of people really struggle, especially solopreneurs, with sales and selling because they actually have to ask for money. That's a very tricky area, especially if you have low self-worth. And many solopreneurs, I know I struggled with that for a really long time, especially when I first started out. If you remember my early episodes when I was talking about how I got started. I mean, I was building websites for like $17 an hour. It was insane how much I was just like, I'll build your website for you and all that good stuff. Yeah, I'll do a lot of it for free. But okay. I mean, it's just, when I look back on it, I was just like this whoop puppy back then. I was just so insecure and was in a situation in my life with personal things that I just felt like I was beat down so much. And I'm just amazed at how far I've come with that whole attitude around sales, selling, helping people figure stuff out. And what I've learned is that sales is all about relationship building. It's all about conducting the right kind of inquiry. and helping your prospect along the path to make a decision about what they want for their business, for themselves, or whatever your particular solution is in what you provide. So if you're a life coach, for example, that person, let's say they're struggling with their relationship and you want to be able to help them with their relationship. Well, that is the conversation that you need to have with them. Like, how much is it hurting for them to make that decision to make it better? So you have to be really good at communicating, very good at listening, and being confident enough to challenge your prospect around their decision about moving forward to solve the problem. I remember years ago when I think it was when I was writing the Compass Playbook, and I created this really good online course around Compass Playbook around relationships. And this is one of the things that I learned about why I'm just not the best marketer. So I bought this one training where you build this webinar. Remember when webinars were first coming on the scene? Everybody was doing these evergreen webinars, woo! And and I was selling admission into my Compass Playbook relationships program. It was part online work, a lot of journaling, a lot of exercises, and it was also weekly meetings and one-on-one life coaching, if you will, for me. I was like ready. I rolled my sleeves up, man. I'm diving all in. I built this course. I did this, I did that. And so I put together this, I remember buying advertising on Facebook too for it. It was just like, oh my gosh. And I shot a video. I made a really good video where I used this formula of this webinar that I bought. And there was definitely a specific formula. And now if I come across a webinar or any type of video that uses that formula, I just kind of get this cringe where I'm like, oh God, I know exactly what they're doing. It's unfortunate that marketing has to be that type of manipulation. I think I underestimate a lot of people need that to help them make decisions. And to me, I'm like, oh my gosh, no, let's just skip all over that and have a conversation. In this video, I talked about losing my husband, Chuck, to cancer and being a widow and getting out and trying to see if I was ready for a new relationship. So I used my own personal experience, which was one of the things that they taught you in this program, is like use your own personal experience. So you obviously come across as legit in your ability to help that person overcome it because you overcame it, right? Classic teacher syndrome, right? Where you can teach it if you've been through it and figured out how to solve the problem. And so I remember I was getting a lot of traction. I was spending a lot of money buying advertising on Facebook and putting up my little webinar thing, and people were signing up, and no men, all women, which is fine because it was catered a little bit toward women who are more present, at least at the time, seemed to me a little more present to working on a relationship and trying to find Mr. Right or Ms. Right or whatever the situation is. And so I did this, and the call to action, if I remember, was for them to have a consult call with me. I was like buying all this stuff. I must have spent over 50 grand over the years on sales training and marketing. And what it taught me was that I just can't execute these other programs. And I've fortunately been able to become much more confident in my sales and feel a lot better about who I am and what I offer, where I'm very confident having a conversation with a prospect now. But it's a much different conversation than what I used to try with these kind of marketing salesy tactic things that I learned about. The amazing thing that I got out of this experience is I was getting on these one-on-one calls to sell these women into the program. And it wasn't that expensive. I think it was like $500 or something, which to me, it seemed like a lot, but it didn't seem like a lot for the result that it was promising. All these women wanted to do was complain and kvetch about their situation. And I didn't realize this until after, but my webinar was so focused on my story that they connected with my story as a person who could empathize with them, and they wanted to share their story. Okay, Terry, I saw yours. Oh my gosh, what a story, what a love story. Oh, I got to tell you about my situation. And that's fine from the standpoint of understanding what they're dealing with and if I can help or not, if the program I was selling the Compass Playbook relationship program was going to be something that could help them. So I needed to know that, but they never moved into actually signing up. I think I maybe got 3 people to do it. And once they got in the program, they didn't participate. They didn't do the work. They didn't show up for the class. And it was just like, it was quite a learning experience for me. But what they valued was to have a conversation with me about their situation. They just wanted someone else who had been through something similar. They wanted to get the sympathy. They wanted to get the, oh, I understand, oh, you poor thing, and all that. And that just wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to help them move forward. And so there was a collision in desires there. And it wasn't until I went through that process for me to understand that's what the problem was. And that's why I backed away from doing a lot of marketing, because I'm like, okay, I'm going to attract all the wrong people. So now it's essentially really having a very intimate one-on-one conversation about what they're struggling with. And I can tell right away if I'm going to be able to help them or not. Believe me, I've had enough people referred to me that were just not ready for what I was able to give them, not ready to solve their problem, not ready to move forward. And you will encounter that too as a solopreneur, where you may have a great marketing or sales setup, as well as a product that you're selling. And you may get people on a call or however you get into the initial sales conversation, and it'll be like pushing a noodle because you can't get them to get out of their current state. Some people get so married to their current state of having the challenge, being in pain, being uncomfortable, that they almost become like a martyr about it. It's like they argue for their limitations. And so if you can recognize where your prospects are, you can be much more powerful at identifying whether or not they're willing to make a change. And so back to where I was initially talking about this one particular podcast that I was listening to that was for life coaches. And it was about selling, marketing and selling for life coaches. And the one thing that she said that always stuck with me that I thought was brilliant in its simplicity was her little process was just start having a conversation with someone. It could be at the grocery store, it could be someone who's referred to you, whatever, and then get them to talk about their problem. So they start talking about their problem, blah, 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 blah. And then when you get to the point where they take a breath or there's a natural break, you say, and here it is, where's the drum roll? Would you like some help with that? And that's it. Would you like some help with that? That question opens so many doors. And I'm not here to give you a sales technique or a sales tactic, but in sharing this with you, what I'm inviting you to consider is maybe selling is a lot simpler than you think it is. There's 2 parts to selling, and this is what I learned through my experience. I even wrote a book on it. My book's called Guide to Selling, and it's kind of like a memoir sales tip book. I wrote it about 10 years ago. It's actually the last book I published. I need to get on the stick about that, don't I? Write some more books because I love to write. Anyway, the thing about selling is, one, it's obviously, you have to understand if you're talking to the right prospect. Are they pre-qualified? Do they have money? Are they in enough pain where they want to change? And then the next thing is what you do, is that something you can actually help them with? So you have to identify, are they the right kind of prospect? And then can you help them with the problem as you understand it? And so what's the next natural step? Well, it's to ask them if they want help with that. And I think a lot of solopreneurs miss that opportunity because they're so focused on how they solve those problems. And that is a trapdoor that you can easily get caught up in. In fact, I just was working with a new client recently, and she was very much about her how. She felt that what would help her get more business was how she did what she did. like I do this and I make sure of this and I spend a lot more time doing this and that and everything. And I'm like, okay, well, that's great. It sounds very thorough. And obviously you take pride in your work, but your prospect doesn't care about how you do it. They care that you're going to solve their problem. And that is so important for solopreneurs to understand. So when you are out there selling, are you selling the how, or are you selling, do they want to change? Do they want to move past it? And I think that example I gave of those women who were coming to me for my relationship course, and they were saying, oh my God, Terry, your story and all about my problem, my problem, my problem. And I don't think I knew this question back then, quite frankly. But if I had asked that, and even in their mind, I think in the front of their mind, they would say, yeah, of course, I want to meet a person. I want to have a rich relationship. The desire is always there, but is it painful enough for them to actually make a change? And this is the one thing that I kind of get a little grumbly about with some sales training is they focus on selling to the pain versus selling to the pleasure. And I'm sure that there's psychology around the fact that we're more apt to make a change because of the pain versus a desire for an aspirational future. That I can kind of understand because nobody wants to be in pain, right? Whatever you're suffering from. But I truly believe that when you're in a sales conversation, if you're trying to sell to the how, if you're not totally focused on understanding if that prospect is really ready to have a conversation with you about it, you're never going to close that person. The other aspect, and this is something that I learned in my business, and it took me a while, because being a solopreneur is a very personal thing, meaning you are the one who's responsible for marketing, selling, delivering the product or the service, invoicing, bookkeeping, everything, right? Yeah, you may use some subcontractors from time to time, but in essence, it's about you delivering something you're good at. And when that happens, what you're facing is taking things too personally. Oh boy, did I do that. Oh, I used to get so defensive on some of these conversations I had in the early days where I would get questions about, why I took a certain approach, or it was usually around pricing, believe it or not. In the early days, I practically gave away my services because I was very insecure about what I was doing and had low self-worth at the time because I was new to business. I'd never had a business before. I'd never really gone out and done these things the way I was doing it then. I want to stand corrected because I did have way back when in the 80s, I had my own little greeting card business. And I was just like a little nymph going through the woods, spreading greeting cards and little cartoony things all over the place. But this was like a real legit business that I was serious about and I wanted to build and had legs. In the beginning, I always over-delivered. I always bent over backwards. Sometimes I would care more about my client's business than they did, at least what it seemed like. And that was really to my detriment because I would get so wrapped around my clients' projects and business that it came to a point where our relationship changed because I'd done all the work. So it was kind of, I wouldn't say it was ending, but it was just changing in what I was able to do for them. They would come back randomly for little things here and there. So it wasn't the intense level of work that we were doing together, which is pretty normal for my business. I used to always second guess my hourly rate. I would always get really defensive when people would challenge me around what things cost. And that's why I'm so glad that I don't charge by the hour anymore, and I've productized all my services. There's so many things that I've learned, and I've already talked about in prior episodes, that have truly made my business so much more effective and enabled me to deliver faster. Like, let's get right to it. Let's start working on this and see how it goes. Back to that podcast. So when I learned about that one question, would you like some help with that? That just opened up so many doors for me because it fit my style. It fit my personality. And I really believed that I was at the point in my business where I was starting to gain more confidence. I wasn't worried about my hourly rate. I was still charging by the hour at that point, but I was charging a lot more than when I started, that's for sure. And so that enabled me to look at what I did so much differently. It enabled me to be much more powerful in a conversation. And especially when I started doing qualitative research, I started getting very comfortable asking probing questions that some people would probably consider uncomfortable, or I don't want to say inappropriate, but enough to make them think that not only did I care, but have they really looked at it this way? And one of my favorite responses to get when I would get in that inquiry mode was like, wow, that's a really good question. I've never thought of it like that before. That would show a prospect that I really cared, at least I hope it did, but that I was curious enough to ask the right kind of questions so I could get to solving their problem that much faster. What I'd like for you to do in your business, in your solopreneur business, when you think about selling, when you think about what tactics should I use, or how do I overcome money objections? How do I overcome time objections? I want to know how you do it. I want to understand every step that you go through and have those conversations, right? So having that question at your disposal, do you want some help with that? Well, I don't really have any money. So I guess you're not ready to have that help. Now, there are other things that come into play. I'm not going to say that it's that black and white. Like, for example, one of the reasons why I created the products in my business the way I did was I created an introductory product, or like a lead product, that was very low cost. And what that did was that exposed a lot of the bigger problems, but it also gave them an early stage solution that they could implement and start seeing like, wow, I can actually solve this problem. And then that would always lead to a larger engagement of where I would build things like websites and all that and so on. That way, when you're first meeting with somebody, you're not like, okay, that's going to be $12,000 and you can give me a 50% deposit right up front. Well, of course they're not going to, you know what I mean? They're less likely to do something right off the bat with you, a provider of services that they've never worked with before. So there are other elements that come into play when you're doing your sales conversations. But I just love that question. Would you like some help with that? Because not only does that align you both together, but if they say no, or if they give you an excuse, you got to work on that. Because until you get past that, until you get them to agree, and there are sales techniques on like you give back to them what they're saying because they can't argue with their own words. I mean, there's a lot of that stuff. And honestly, it can help you get better and more confident in the sales conversation, but I'm not a big fan of those types of manipulations. I think just having a real conversation with somebody and understanding what they're about and what they're struggling with is the most important part. And it's always worked for me. The prompt I want to give you is do that. Go through your past sales conversations where you've had, and if you haven't had any yet, if you're just getting started, that's fine too. You can practice on a friend or a spouse or somebody you're working with. And practice going through the process of having the conversation. Tell me about what's going on. And they go through and they tell, the whole situation. You ask clarifying questions. And then you go ahead and you ask the question, do you want some help with that? When it gets to that point where you've got like, okay, I got a good idea as far as what they're struggling with and what they're moving forward, and ask that question and then see what happens. If they're giving you an immediate objection, they're not quite ready. So then you have to help them get ready, or you have to move on. Say, well, listen, when you feel you're ready to deal with it, let's talk again. I'm more than happy to help. I know I can help you, but it doesn't sound like you've worked through everything to solve your problem. But if they say, yes, I would like some help with that, say, okay, this is how I work. I know that's kind of a basic way to look at it, but it may be a different way for you to look at your approach when you're having sales conversations. That's essentially how I got good at sales, by asking that question, by developing my own process that fit me, and learning how self-worth really plays into it, especially when you're a solopreneur, because you do have a tendency to take things personally, and which is completely understandable. But you don't have to, because it's business and you're there to provide a service, to get paid for it, and to help them accomplish their goals. So I hope that was helpful, and I will see you in the next episode. Don't forget to do your prompt. Well, I know you're disappointed, but that's it for this episode. Listen, the great news is there's another one coming, so stay tuned. Anyway, I just want to make sure that you do the prompt. If this episode had a prompt, and you get that homework done because you're going to be a better solopreneur. How's that for a maternal finger shaking at you? Hey, listen, thanks so much for being here, for giving me time of your day, and, for taking it on. So if you want to learn more and stay connected with me, just head on over to mysolopreneurlife.com. Thanks a bunch. See you soon. That was pretty good. I think I'll keep that one.